Greetings, dear friends, and welcome to another video in my new series, AUM Question and Answers video series that I've been prompted to make and share during this time of a greater awakening and an increased awareness and the raising of consciousness, shall we say, across the globe. And today's topic is channeling, something that's actually quite dear to my heart. I'll explain why in a moment or two, but also because it's very concerning to me to see the misunderstanding around channeling that's out there at the moment and the misinformation that's coming through some of the channeling at this time too. And again, I'll explain more when we get to that. So, I'm Sylvia Vowles, and I have been a spiritual teacher for over 30 years. I've been studying and researching and receiving direct revelations for the past 50 years. It's been my passion. And channeling first came into my awareness back in the late 1980s when I was asked in a meditation, would I be willing to channel? And at first I said, no way. The reason was because I associated channeling only with the mediumship that you'll find at a spiritualist church, where people go to find comfort because the medium is often able to talk to their loved ones who've passed over. And so it's a very great service for that. And I knew within me that that definitely wasn't my path this lifetime. So the querying, would I do it, continued for quite some time. And I ignored it. And in the end, I thought, I suppose I better look at this. So I did. And I said, why? The answers I was given made sense at the time. And so I very reluctantly agreed that I would learn to channel. Now, what followed was a period of many months of inner training on the inner planes by masters of the Order of Melchizedek. It was often a daily thing. I was given trainings and understandings of what channeling's about and how to do it correctly. The biggest understandings that I needed to know, and this applies to anybody who's channeling, is first of all about tapping into different source levels. And also the other big one is stepping aside your own personality, your own beliefs and opinions, and tapping into your subconscious mind, because unless you know how to step aside, as I call it, and allow this information to come through, then your beliefs and opinions and programs will get in the way. These are all recorded in your subconscious mind, as neuroscience is now telling us, right from when we're born. These beliefs and programs are taken on board from those around us, our culture, our society, religion, and so on. So they're not necessarily true. But these run your life, apparently, according to neuroscience, for 95% of the time. So that means unless you've looked at them and changed them or replaced them with things that are your truth now, these programs are likely to get in the way. And so with channeling, they will color and interfere with what you're bringing through, unless you know how to switch that side of you off, as it were. For me, it took a while to learn to step aside. I was given several initiations, which was preparing me, and I had to work on increasing my own vibrational frequency, because the level that you channel from, vibrationally speaking, consciously speaking, must be compatible with your own vibrational frequency and consciousness that you can step into when you channel. In other words, it's like an electrical compatibility. They must match, which means to channel things that are of value, the channel themselves must do a lot of inner work normally to lift their frequency. Otherwise, they will only be able to tap into the lowest level sources. And the lowest level, the easiest thing to tap into, is the astral plane, which is the next one from the physical. And it's also a plane of illusion. And this is the challenge, because entities who are still on that plane of illusion, that astral plane, and who are wanting to enjoy, shall we say, or work through people who are still in physical form, are able to reach them if the channel themselves is not wary, and also to claim to be whatever name or person or entity or angel or whatever that the channel would like to hear, would like to be in touch with. In other words, they're tricksters, they're con artists on the astral, the same as they were in 3D life. So being aware of this means that you then can learn to discern the levels that you are connecting with and tapping into. Sadly, these days, a lot of very well-meaning people, and I want to make this clear, the channels out there today, I'm not casting aspersions on them as people in any way at all. I'm sure they are all genuinely wanting to help and to serve, and the fact that they've suddenly found they can channel is a way that they see that they might be able to. The problem is, if they don't understand the whole scenario, as it were, then they can fall prey to some of these very major pitfalls. And as I say, the entities, and including the dark forces, shall we call them, who are hijacking some of the channels themselves because they don't realize this, in order to get their misinformation through. And this is happening on quite a wide scale. So it does mean that when you listen or read channeling, please be very, very discerning. The problem often is that people see there's a channeling or hear it's a channeling and automatically think, oh, well, if it's channeled, it must be true. Nothing could be further from the truth, believe you me. And also because these lower entities, as I say, will use these grandiose names, that too can put people in the 3D into the delusion that it is that level, that entity, who is actually doing the channeling through the person. And again, this is not necessarily so. In fact, the more grandiose the name, I would suggest, is less likely to be accurate. Lao Tzu, who was an ascended master, he put it this way: those who know it, tell it not. Those who tell it, know it not. And what he was referring to was the titles that people give themselves about how advanced they are, or what dimension they're on, or who they are in the hierarchy, and so forth. So be very, very careful. Check always, is my suggestion, check the validity of the person who is channeling, and see what their own knowledge base is, and what they understand about the phenomenon, because otherwise, well-meaning as they may be, it doesn't mean that they're accurately connecting with who they think they are, and bringing through worthwhile information. Because this is the crux of the matter. What is channeling for? Well, at its best, channeling can inform us of things that we otherwise wouldn't find anywhere else, like in books or teachings, or other people. That's its original purpose. It was given to us as a phenomenon back in the late 1980s, as a bridge, if you like, to move the mass consciousness of humanity on from the um, conditioning that most of us had grown up with, of the traditional churches and religions, which a lot of us were feeling we wanted to be free of, we wanted to move on from, but we still had that conditioning. And so the source level was not always checked out, either of the channel themselves or who they say they were actually tapping into. So first of all, look at the source channel of the channel and look at the channel themselves. What is their knowledge base? Because if they don't have any understanding of how this all works, they can be hoodwinked just as easily as anyone else. My own journey in channeling, I'll tell you why I'm very concerned about this, and I do have an understanding about it that I'm sharing now, is that when I was asked in the 80s if I would channel, I definitely said no, and I felt that that wasn't my role, which I thought was as a medium in a spiritualist church where the mediums can contact those who've passed on, and it's very comforting for people who've lost a loved one. But I knew that wasn't for me. And so for a while, when I was asked on the inner planes, would I channel, I said no. And being very stubborn, I kept saying no. But anyway, eventually I queried it because it kept coming back and coming back. And it was from that point on where I grudgingly said, okay, I suppose if that's what a part of my service, I will. And then followed many, many months, almost daily trainings and understandings, initiations I had to go through to prepare me to be able to tap into a high enough frequency that would bring in useful information, of information that wasn't available any other place. And so this was done, as I say, in my meditation on the inner planes with masters from the Order of Melchizedek. And it was quite a long, drawn-out process to learn to stand aside, as I mentioned, and not allow my thoughts and beliefs and programs to color it in any way. So when I was considered ready, then it was suggested I hold 4 consecutive weekend Sunday afternoons sessions and invite people in to come and listen, where I would gain the confidence, because I didn't have much at that time, of channeling. So I did this, and the suggestion was also made to record it, and in those days it was cassette tapes, if some of you will remember them as well. So these teachings were recorded, and then later, through an interesting sequence of events, they became transcribed and formed the first book I published at that time, which was called originally Are You Ready for Ascension? Because that was what it was about, how to prepare for it, what was necessary, and so forth. And I'll tell you more about that in my other new video I've just made on Ascension. So I got this understanding, as I say, quite deeply. It wasn't just something that happened. And for me, having always been a teacher, I'm very, very aware of the responsibility of being as accurate in what I share in any way, whether it's teaching, speaking, or channeling, as I possibly can be as a normal, fallible human being. So I wanted to share that with you, because what's happening now is people are, as I say, are finding they can tap into different entities, or it seems they are. And these entities are very clever. They can often give information that is correct or okay in order to lull the listeners into a sense of security, because it's something that they've actually heard or come across before. There's a clue straight away. that these entities are not doing this for our good, because why would they bother, an evolved being bother to channel stuff that's already available out there and is in the mainstream? For example, I've seen channelings recently, supposedly from very evolved beings, ninth dimensional and Arcturian councils and heaven knows what else, grandiose names that they've given themselves, which is just ordinary information on manifestation and how to manifest, which has been around for decades. You can find it in many, many, many books. And then, because the listener thinks, "Oh, well, that sounds okay," and then this entity, if they are of the fallen hierarchy or on the other side, as we would say, they then insert cleverly into it misinformation. It's not obvious, because their agenda is to slow down or preferably stop as many people's evolution on a spiritual level as they can. So, for example, you might not think there's anything wrong in this, but I'll explain why you need to be wary. People I've seen have been listening to a particular channeling recently that is saying, "Oh, this is what's going to happen in the future, in the political scene in America and in the world. This is going to happen, that's going to happen," and so on. Now, that sounds okay on the surface, but have a think deeper about it. First of all, would an evolved being who is channeling be bothered with that sort of information and wanting to pass it through? Secondly, if we've been told that the future is set, which is what the suggestion is, it's disempowering, because it's taking away our sovereignty as a human being who can create the reality that they choose, individually and collectively. And you and I know that's a fact. The lives are the expression of what we choose to create, whether it's knowingly or unknowingly. So if the future's set, what is the point? We'd be like pawns on a big cosmic chess game, I guess. In other words, it's taking away and undermining our sense of self, of sovereign self. So you can see it's very subtle. It's not obvious. It's not hurting in an obvious sense, but it is certainly disempowering big, big time, because it means that people, if they take that on board, would subconsciously think, "Oh, well, that's okay, so it's all going to happen anyway. I don't have to do anything about it. I don't have to play my part. I don't have to contribute in any way to what's happening out there." So you can see it's an insidious way of disempowerment. So that's just one example of many, many, many. Another thought, Galactic Councils seem to be a bit of a flavour of the month at the moment. And again, it's possible, of course, they're there, and it's possible that they would want to help us. But again, think of it this way: how would it help us by saying, "We're going to come and do it all for you. Just wait until we arrive, and then everything's going to be fine. We're going to make it all good," which is what many of them are suggesting. Again, that puts us in a completely disempowered situation that we're not going to bother, we're not going to do anything, we're not going to be positive and work on creating our own reality collectively as well as individually, because some beings are going to come and fix everything and fix all the mess that we've made and make it all right, and we just have to sit back and enjoy the journey. Is that helpful? Let's compare it to children. If you've got children, you'll appreciate this really, really well. If every time they came across problems or created problems and challenges for themselves, and you as a parent or caregiver stepped in and said, oh, don't worry, we'll fix it, we'll clear up the mess, we'll make it right, would that be the kindest thing to do? No, it would mean the child would never learn the sense of self-responsibility and the fact that they need to learn to create consciously and in the right way. So you can see the, excuse me, the interference is very subtle, but nevertheless, it is very, very real. Now, I've made a few notes so I don't forget any important points. Excuse me, I've got a wee frog. Okay, so channeling, as I say, excuse me, was originally to give us information that wasn't available anywhere else. Now, the other pitfall is that anything that we read, see, hear, and listen to, whether it's our own experience or channeled or whatever, still has to pass through the filters of our subconscious mind. This is neuroscientifically proven now. And again, that means our preconceived beliefs and programs can influence whatever's coming through if we're not aware of it. So there's several different aspects to this, which I think you're beginning to hopefully appreciate why you need to be very, very wary. It is not, because it's channeled, necessarily correct, as I said before, and it's not necessarily for our well-being and our advancement. And I don't want to emphasize it too much, but we live in a universe of polarity. So you've got the genuine spiritual hierarchy, the angelic realms, and so on, the ascended masters, who are there to support us. They can't do things for us, but they certainly do support us as much as they can. So, of course, because of this polarity, there is the fallen hierarchy. Those beings who, as I said before, want to stop or at least slow down our spiritual progress and evolution. And so that's why the fallen hierarchy sometimes come in to an unsuspecting channel and say it's the name of some ascended master or some angel in the true spiritual hierarchy, which the person doesn't realize is not correct, because there is a cosmic law that says they have to identify themselves. So they usually add another name to the original genuine one. Like I've seen the variations of Saint Germain. If it's Saint Germain, it is Saint Germain, full stop. He doesn't have any other titles or names at all that's necessary, and so forth. So again, it's subtle, and I guess the whole world is in a state now of awakening, and discernment is certainly absolutely necessary. This is the prophesied time of the false prophets, the false information. And the fallen hierarchy have realized that if they can hijack a lot of these unsuspecting, well-meaning channels, they've got a really good means of feeding in disempowering information and misinformation. So, the other things to check out when you're querying it, which I hope you will do in future, is it giving unprovable claims, things that, oh yes, they're like fairy tales that we'd love to believe. We've all believed in fairy tales, no doubt, as a child, and that's fine when we were children, same as we believed in Santa Claus and so on. But we have to come to a point where we can say, now, is this really factual based, or is this fantasy? Is it like, I wish it would be? Is your idealism coloring it as saying, oh yes, that would be so wonderful, that's the way the world needs to go, and that's the way it's going to happen, the world's going to be saved, and by whatever means, and we're all going to live in this amazing utopia. Again, that's disempowering because you then won't bother. You think it's going to happen anyway, with or without you, so you just go along for the ride, as it were. So that's another thing. If you don't employ your left brain hemisphere, which is your questioning, your rational, your logical brain, as well as your right, because channeling works through the right brain hemisphere. And the challenge here is the right brain hemisphere in all of us is our creative side, our imaginative side. So that's where we do create fantasies and stories and fictions. So we need to balance that, and I always use the figure of eight, lemniscate symbol, with the cross-checking with the left brain, so that we're not taken on a joyride of a story tale or a fiction tale. For example, I'll give you one example. Many years ago, when all of this channeling became a big thing, a group of people I knew, someone had channeled to them that they were going to go ascend. And again, please listen to my other video on ascension if you want to understand the pitfalls of that too. And that they needed to gather on a certain hill locally here, where I live in New Zealand. And then they would be picked up by the spaceships, in other words, like a beam me up Scotty scenario. Well, these people gathered up there, they left their jobs, they, in some cases, sold their houses, and they kept going up there day after day, turned into weeks. You get the picture. And eventually, when they were beginning to think that this maybe wasn't correct, or they were running out of funds or whatever, then they decided that maybe this was all a ruse. Now, that actually happened. That's a true story. So these are the dangers of people believing without question a channeled message. As I say, it possibly wasn't done with any ill intent, but that's the result. That's how it was interpreted. So just to give you a little bit of example of some of the things to watch out for. Unprovable claims and promises. Other things are ignorance of the universal laws which govern the whole of life on this 3D planet. We need to have an understanding of those universal laws because they are there to guide us. And in my little booklet, The Universal Laws, The Truth Will Set You Free, which is available free. I'm happy to send it via email as an attachment to anybody who wants it. Having a knowledge of these, you will actually see how they guide us to be more discerning and give us some of the foundational information we need in order to discern and navigate our way, if you like, through this world, through this life. Other things that are being channeled are supposedly because of certain planetary alignments or eclipses or moon phases or whatever. And the information's coming through that, oh yes, this is going to mean that everybody is going to then be downloaded with information or codes or suddenly become aware or enlightened or whatever. All these claims are being made out there. I've seen them just because of a certain planetary alignment or situation. Again, that's disempowering. That means if that was so, what are we here for? We're just pawns in a cosmic chess game. There's no point in living really or having our own free will. And it also means that if, and of course it's only an if, it isn't possible, but should it have any truth in it, that everybody on the planet, the 7 to 8 billion people on the planet today, must all be at the same evolutionary level and ready for an advancement like this en masse. And that is obviously not true. So again, this is another thing to be very, very questioning about, as you can imagine. The more glamorous it is and the more fixes that it promises, I would say the bigger alarm bells for you to go off. I have written a little article about it, which I'm happy to send via email to anybody if you email me. And how to discern, I've sort of listed a few basic questions, so I'll share them with you now very quickly, just briefly. If you want more detail, I'm happy to send you the document. Check, as I said before, the purpose of the communication and whether or not it provides information or knowledge that you couldn't get from an earthly source. Oh, is it loving and peaceful? In other words, do you feel calm and content and at peace within yourself after you've listened or read it? Because any channeling that creates fear or urgency or anxiety is definitely not coming from a higher source. I saw this actually happen some years ago. A lovely young woman was channeling, and at the beginning she was a very pure channel. And here's another warning, but she was a trance channel, which again is not advisable, because if your consciousness is not there, which it isn't when you're in a trance, you cannot notice if your original connection has changed and some other entity has come in, which I actually observed happening. And so this other negative entity that came in the middle of an ordinary channeling and took over was then telling people, oh yes, you better be careful, you better get yourself guns and arm yourself, because there's going to be upheaval and anarchy and you've got to protect your possessions and family and so on. That's not coming from a higher loving space, is it? So again, always be wary, and certainly don't listen to trance channels if I were you. Another one is, as I mentioned before, I am going over them, but they are so important. I think it bears a quick repeat. Is it credible? Is it possible? Is it factual? Does it make sense? Never leave your common sense at the door, please. And is it to do with life on Earth as we know it? Or is it just filling your head with wonderful stories of what may happen, will happen, when you're not of the 3D Earth plane? What's the point of that, even if it were true? We are here. We're in a physical body. We have things that we've come to do. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here in a 3D body. So again, it's taking people away from their real purpose. And again, that is not helpful, and it's certainly slowing down or even stopping their progress. Is it for the highest good and usefulness of all people? Because credible information would be for the good of all. We're all connected. We're all part of the unity consciousness, the one human family. And so anything that was valuable, and this is going back a ways, would have been for the good of everybody. If it's just channeled and it's only good for the person or the people listening, in other words, you are special. In fact, sometimes they even used to say that. I would find the nearest exit or discard that channeling, because no, it is, if it's still coming in and anything to be credible, it is for everybody's growth and empowerment. Yes, empowering help. And also, I've seen this happen too in the past. If you're looking or watching a channel and they employ what I call a theatrical performance, I've seen this happen in the past, where they would make weird noises or weird sort of movements and big palaver like a theatrical show of um, some entity supposedly coming in and taking over and so on. Not necessary. You think about it. If it's a credible source, they don't need theatrics. They will just simply and quietly give the information through the channel in their normal voice. The channel will be using their voice, not some other theatrical voice. And then you can be sure that if there is a performance going on, it's entertainment. And as again, I wouldn't give it too much credence if I were you. Also, people say, oh, someone is channeling my higher self or soul. To me, that is not logical. I'm a very logical person, but also, again, that would be overturning, shall we say, the individual's power as a sovereign being. Channeling is subjective. In other words, it comes under the power and influence of the person who's doing the channeling. It doesn't mean that channeling in the past sometimes didn't give some good information and some guidance en masse, but as I said, it would be for everybody. But be on the watch out for that. Also, never trust channeling that says, oh, this channel is so enlightened, is such a special person, and they've been chosen for this special job, and so forth. It never does that either. It doesn't need to. By their works ye shall know them is a very good maxim to follow. So I trust I've given you some food for thought. Always check it out yourself with your own inner knowing. And also, my personal advice, having been sent and seeing a lot of what's around now, is, well, put it this way, I would say 95 to 99% of the channeling around is ego-based, is not reliable. Its source levels are very doubtful and so forth. So why bother with channeling? Why not learn the biggest step in my understanding of our spiritual evolution is to learn to tap into our own source of knowledge, which we can learn to do, our own inner guidance, to connect with our own inner voice. And through that inner voice, being able to connect with our own soul, which knows the lessons and the things we're here to accomplish in this lifetime. And the soul in it is also in connection with our higher self, which has the higher perspective overview. That, to me, is the biggest step that we can aspire to while we're in the 3D. So rather than listen to other people, work on yourself. And if you make the intention that that's what I want to do, to connect and communicate with my true self, my soul, the Holy Spirit, and my higher self are the terms I use, then make that the focus of your time and energy. I have made other videos on my little video channel that gives you some help on how to do that, and some exercises and some checkpoints and so forth. So do check that out if you feel that you're ready for that. And let me just close with the very wise words of Buddha, and he put it this way: do not believe a thing because it is said by an authority, or because it is said to come from angels or from gods or from an inspired source. Believe it only if you have explored it in your own heart and mind and body and found it to be true. Work out your own path through the world with diligence. And I think, of course, that he's summed it up beautifully. So I leave you with many blessings on the path, and thank you again for joining me at this time, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future. Take care, and I'll leave you with a blessing in Hebrew, which simply states the fact that each of us are holy spiritual beings, and we are connected to whatever term you call the source. In this particular blessing, it's the Aya Asher Aya, which means the all that is. Kadosh, 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 Aya Asher Aya. Kadosh, 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 Aya Asher Aya. Kadosh, 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 Aya Asher Aya. It is so.